There comes a moment when you realize that earning respect is not about how loud you are, how many titles you hold, or how perfectly put together your life looks on the outside. It's about alignment, when your actions speak louder than your intentions, and your character speaks louder than your words. Respect is never demanded. It's quietly given by those who feel safe in your presence and see the integrity in your choices. But sometimes we carry habits that silently sabotage our ability to be seen, heard, and valued. These habits aren't always loud or obvious. Often, they're woven into the way we respond when we're hurt, insecure, or scared. And if you want to earn real, lasting respect from others and from yourself, there are 5 deeply embedded habits you must let go of. Not because you're broken, but because you're worthy of more. There's a quiet kind of self-betrayal that happens when you say sorry for things that don't need forgiveness, and it doesn't always look like guilt. It often looks like self-doubt disguised as politeness. You apologize when you ask for help, even though you're drowning. You say sorry when you share your opinion, even though it matters. You shrink yourself in conversations, in relationships, in rooms where your voice should rise. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because somewhere along the line, you were taught that taking up space makes you a burden. This habit doesn't come from weakness. It comes from conditioning, from being told directly or subtly that your feelings were too much, that your needs were inconvenient, that your presence was optional. So you learn to preface your existence with apologies. You began to believe that in order to be accepted, you had to soften every truth, downplay every success, and apologize for every boundary. But here's the truth. Over-apologizing doesn't make you more likable. It makes you forgettable. It tells the world that even you don't believe in your own voice, and people follow your lead. If you keep signaling that your thoughts, your boundaries, your time don't matter, they won't matter to anyone else either. That's how you end up being overlooked, dismissed, taken for granted. Not because others are cruel, but because you keep showing them how to treat you. Respect doesn't begin when others see your worth. It begins when you do, when you stop using the word sorry to protect others from your presence. When you realize that being assertive isn't rude, it's honest. That needing something isn't weak, it's human. That sharing a truth isn't conflict, it's clarity. And that confidence doesn't mean being loud. It means being grounded in who you are even when the room goes quiet. And you don't have to make a grand announcement to change this. It starts in the smallest of moments, when you say thank you for waiting instead of sorry I'm late. When you say I'd like to add something instead of I'm sorry, I just wanted to say. When you say nothing at all because you finally realize your existence isn't something that needs a disclaimer. This habit of apologizing for your very being. It can feel impossible to break, especially if it's been your armor, your way of navigating a world that didn't always welcome you as you are. But bit by bit, breath by breath, you can start peeling it away, not all at once, just enough to stand a little taller, just enough to stop explaining your worth, just enough to remember that you don't need permission to exist boldly and gently at the same time. And maybe that's the beginning. Not of arrogance, not of entitlement, but of deep-rooted, unshakable respect. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped apologizing for who you've always been. There's a kind of exhaustion that lives in the bones of those who constantly try to be everything for everyone. It's not physical tiredness, it's soul fatigue, the kind that creeps in when you smile even though you're breaking inside, when you say yes, even though every part of you is whispering, please say no. It's the quiet ache of living a life where your value is measured by how useful, agreeable, or pleasant you are to others, and where your own needs are always the last to be considered, if they're considered at all. People-pleasing wears a friendly face. It looks like helpfulness. It looks like generosity. It even looks like love, but underneath it, it's fear of being rejected, fear of being seen as difficult, fear of being alone if you dare to disagree, and so you learn to mold yourself into whatever shape the people around you need. You adapt, you absorb, you accommodate, not because you're weak, but because somewhere deep down you were taught that love is earned by being easy to deal with. That respect comes when you minimize your discomfort so others can remain comfortable. But here's the truth no one tells you when you're bending over backwards to be liked. People don't respect a watered-down version of you. They don't see your invisible sacrifices, the silent swallowing of your truth. The nights you lay awake wondering why you feel so empty, even though you're surrounded by people who like you. Because being liked is not the same as being valued. Being needed is not the same as being respected. And when you build your identity around what others want from you, you slowly start to forget who you really are. True kindness doesn't come at the cost of your boundaries. True compassion doesn't ask you to betray yourself. You can love people without losing yourself in them. You can show up fully without saying yes to things that drain your spirit. You can be honest, and it might disappoint someone, but that disappointment doesn't mean you've done something wrong. It means you're finally honoring your truth. And the hard part, the part no one wants to admit, is that when you stop people pleasing, some people will leave, some people will get upset. Some people will call you selfish or cold or different. But the ones who stay, the ones who respect your no, your needs, your voice, those are your people. And you won't find them until you stop performing for the ones who only loved the version of you that never asked for anything in return. So you begin slowly by noticing when you're about to say yes just to keep the peace. You pause when you feel the urge to explain or justify every little thing. You give yourself permission to disappoint someone, not out of spite, but out of deep, grounded self-respect. Because every time you abandon yourself to please others, you reinforce the belief that your own well-being is optional. And it's not. It never was. You don't have to be the easy one. You don't have to be the one who always says yes. You don't have to be the fixer, the rescuer, the caretaker of everyone else's feelings. What you do have to be, if you want real respect, is honest, real, boundaried, and willing to stand in the discomfort of letting people see the parts of you that don't exist for their convenience. And maybe, just maybe, in doing that, you'll stop needing the approval that once kept you hostage. There's a lie many of us were taught, that silence is strength, that staying quiet makes you wise, or humble, or mature. And yes, there's a place for stillness, for listening, for not reacting from emotion. But the silence I'm talking about, the one that lives deep in the throat when your body screams for you to speak up, but your fear holds you hostage, that silence is not strength. That silence is suffocation. That silence is the slow, daily erosion of your identity. It begins innocently enough. Maybe you don't speak up in the meeting because you don't want to seem difficult. Maybe you stay quiet in your relationship because you don't want to cause an argument. Maybe you swallow your truth in front of your family because you don't want to be the dramatic one. But every time you choose silence in moments that demand your voice, you send a quiet message to yourself. My truth isn't safe here. And over time, that message becomes your reality. You start to believe that conflict is dangerous, that honesty is selfish, that standing up for yourself will make people leave. So you convince yourself it's better to be agreeable, better to avoid the discomfort, better to keep things calm on the outside, even if there's a storm raging inside. But calm isn't always peace. Sometimes it's paralysis. You tell yourself you're protecting others by staying quiet, but often what you're really doing is protecting yourself from rejection. And that's okay, because that fear is real. That fear likely came from a time when your voice was punished. Maybe you were shut down, mocked, ignored, or maybe you learned that love came more easily when you didn't rock the boat. So you taught yourself to be silent, to keep the waters smooth, and it worked for a while until it didn't. Because respect isn't earned through silence. It's earned through honesty. Through the courage it takes to say, this isn't okay, or I see this differently, or I need something more. Your voice isn't a weapon, it's a bridge, and when used with clarity and compassion, it becomes the very thing that connects you more deeply to the people who are meant to walk with you. But using your voice after years of silence isn't easy. It feels clumsy at first, awkward, emotional. You might cry when you speak up, or shake, or regret how it came out. That doesn't mean you failed, that means you're healing. That means you're finally choosing discomfort over invisibility. That means you're remembering that your presence was never meant to be muted. And maybe that's the first shift. Not shouting to be heard, but whispering truths that have lived too long in the shadows. Saying the thing you've never said, asking the question you've always avoided, naming the feeling you were taught to hide, not for applause, not to be right, but simply because your voice deserves to exist outside your body. There's a deeply ingrained urge to explain ourselves, to overclarify our choices, our boundaries, our dreams, and even our pain. It starts early. You say no, and feel the immediate need to soften it with a reason. You take a different path and feel the pressure to justify it to everyone who doesn't understand. You start to heal, to grow, to change, and suddenly you're carrying the weight of everyone else's confusion, discomfort, or disappointment, as if it's your responsibility to make them feel okay about your becoming. But it's not. You don't owe anyone a perfectly wrapped story for why you are the way you are. You don't owe them your pain in digestible pieces just so they'll be less uncomfortable with your truth. You don't owe anyone a play of your healing, your choices, your boundaries. And yet, so many of us feel this constant, relentless need to prove we're reasonable, to prove we're good, to prove we're not being selfish when we choose ourselves. You say, "I can't come," and immediately follow it with 5 layers of explanation. You say, "I need space," and instantly start listing all the reasons why you're still a kind and loving person. You change your mind, and before you've even caught your breath, you're trying to make everyone else comfortable with a decision that wasn't theirs to begin with. That's not empowerment. That's emotional labor you were never meant to carry. There's nothing wrong with sharing yourself, but there's a difference between openness and obligation, between choosing to be vulnerable and feeling forced to defend your truth just to keep the peace. Real peace doesn't demand that kind of self-sacrifice. Real respect doesn't require you to hand over your story just to be seen as valid. You are allowed to say, "This is what I need," and leave it at that. You are allowed to walk away without painting yourself as the villain or the saint. You are allowed to disappoint people who expected you to live a life that was never meant for you. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop explaining your boundaries like they're up for debate. It means you start understanding that your worth isn't tied to how well others receive your choices. Some people will misunderstand you. Some will judge you. Some will call you cold or distant or selfish. And that will sting, especially if you're someone who's spent their whole life trying to be understood. But understanding isn't the same as respect. And you don't need the former to deserve the latter, and when you stop explaining, something powerful happens. You begin to listen to your own voice more than theirs. You begin to trust your inner knowing even when the outside world gets loud. You begin to rest, not just physically, but emotionally, because you're no longer scrambling to make everyone else okay with a path they were never meant to walk. There's a certain kind of nice that doesn't come from love. It comes from fear. The fear of being rejected, judged, abandoned. The fear of not being liked. So you become the person who never says no. The one who's always agreeable, always smiling, always giving more than you have to people who take without asking. And it gets praised. People tell you how sweet you are, how easygoing, how selfless. But deep down, you know what it costs, because being nice all the time doesn't feel good. It feels like disappearing. You start to notice it in the small ways first. You say yes to favors you don't want to do. You go along with plans that exhaust you. You listen patiently while someone crosses your boundaries, and instead of speaking up, you nod, you smile, you make excuses for them. You shrink yourself to keep the peace. You tolerate things that hurt you just to avoid making someone else uncomfortable. And the worst part is, you do it so automatically that you start to forget what you even want. You don't know what your no sounds like anymore because it's been buried under years of compulsive yesies. And somewhere along the way, nice stopped being kind and started being a mask. One that hides your anger, your exhaustion, your unmet needs. One that keeps you in relationships where you're not seen, only served. One that convinces you that being liked is more important than being whole. But kindness without boundaries isn't kindness, it's compliance. It's self-erasure dressed up as generosity. The truth is, not everyone deserves your softness. Not everyone has earned your time, your energy, your effort. And that doesn't make you unkind. It makes you wise. Real kindness has limits. Real love is honest. Real integrity doesn't require you to bleed for people who wouldn't offer you a bandage. But if you've lived most of your life being the nice one, setting boundaries will feel like violence. At first, you'll feel guilty, selfish, cold. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries will push back. They'll call you distant. They'll say you've changed, and they'll be right. You are changing. You're finally learning that your worth doesn't come from how easily you bend, how much you tolerate, how softly you disappear to make others feel bigger. And as that truth sinks in, you'll find yourself craving a different kind of respect. Not the kind that comes from being liked, but the kind that comes from being real, from being rooted, from standing in your truth without apologizing for it. You'll start to speak up, even if your voice trembles. You'll start to say no, even if it breaks the pattern you've lived in for years. And you'll begin to see that the world doesn't fall apart when you stop being the overly nice version of yourself. There's a deep hunger inside so many of us, a hunger not for food or sleep or success, but for one quiet moment when someone looks at us and says, "You're enough." And when that hunger goes unspoken, unmet, it starts to shape how we show up in the world. We start performing, we start curating. We filter our feelings, our faces, our failures. Not because we're fake, but because we're afraid. Afraid that who we really are might not be enough for love, for belonging, for respect. And so you seek it, constantly. In conversations, you're always scanning. Did they like what I said? Did I say too much? Did I sound smart enough? At work, you overachieve not just to grow, but to prove, to be seen as competent, worthy, valuable. On social media, you share not because it fills you, but because the likes give you a tiny hit of relief. You go on dates and friendships and even family gatherings with a low-grade anxiety buzzing under the surface. Will they like me? Will I be accepted? Am I doing enough to be wanted? But what you don't realize, until it's almost too late, is that the more you chase validation from the outside, the more invisible you become to yourself. You start abandoning your own truth in subtle ways. You laugh at jokes that hurt. You hide your ideas because they might be too much. You stay in roles, jobs, relationships that feel like slow suffocation, just because you're scared of what people will think if you choose a different life. And in doing so, piece by piece, you become a stranger to your own soul. Validation isn't inherently wrong. We're wired for connection, for affirmation. But when you make it your compass, you lose your direction. You stop asking, what do I think? What do I want? And instead start living in reaction to everyone else's expectations. You let your value fluctuate based on how others respond to you, which means you're never truly grounded. You're always waiting for someone else to tell you you're okay. And the irony is, the more you chase being seen, the less people actually see you. Because you're not showing up as you. You're showing up as a mirror for what you think they want. You edit yourself, you dim your light. You twist yourself into shapes that fit their comfort. And you convince yourself that this is safety, but it's not. It's slow erasure. It's a quiet disappearing act. And one day, you wake up and realize you don't know how to validate yourself. You don't know how to sit with your own emotions without outsourcing them. You don't know how to stand in your truth without searching someone's eyes to make sure it's okay. And that realization, it breaks something open. Not in a destructive way, but in a necessary way. A way that says, I'm tired of being unseen even by myself. And so you begin. You start reclaiming your voice, your preferences, your truth. Not for applause, but because it's yours. You start learning to live from the inside out. You start noticing the difference between love and approval, between respect and flattery. You stop waiting for someone else to name your worth. Because maybe, just maybe, the validation you've been chasing all this time is the one you needed to give yourself. There's a quiet kind of pain that comes from sitting across from someone who belittles you, dismisses you, interrupts you, or laughs at your dreams, and you just take it. You smile through it. You tell yourself it's not worth the fight, that they didn't mean it, that you're just being sensitive, and you call it maturity. You call it patience. You call it taking the high road. But deep down, what you're really doing is abandoning yourself. Slowly, repeatedly, until you can't even recognize your own reflection without flinching. You think you're being humble. You think you're rising above. But humility doesn't mean becoming small. It doesn't mean letting people cross lines that should never be crossed. It doesn't mean allowing someone to chip away at your dignity so you can seem easy to get along with. That's not humility. That's fear dressed in virtue. That's the quiet negotiation of your soul for the sake of being accepted. And it's heartbreaking because no one really teaches you the difference. We're told to be kind, to be forgiving, to be the bigger person. But what happens when those values are weaponized against you? What happens when you start interpreting constant disrespect as your burden to carry, your test of patience, your invitation to grow? You end up confusing abuse for strength. You end up rewarding people with your silence. You end up normalizing what should never feel normal, and slowly something begins to shift inside. It's subtle at first. You lose the sharpness of your voice. The fire in your gut dulls. Your intuition whispers, this isn't okay. But you push it down because rocking the boat feels more dangerous than drowning in it. You start justifying bad behavior, explaining it away, minimizing it in the name of peace. But peace that comes at the cost of your self-respect is not peace, it's paralysis. And the saddest part, you begin to turn on yourself. You start to believe maybe you do deserve it. Maybe you are too much, too sensitive, too demanding. Maybe their cruelty is a reflection of your worth. And the moment you start swallowing their disrespect as if it were truth, you no longer need them to diminish you. You've learned how to do it yourself. But something sacred begins to stir the moment you realize that honoring yourself isn't selfish, that drawing a line isn't harsh, that saying, I won't allow this isn't weakness. It's reclamation. And it's terrifying because the first time you stop tolerating disrespect, the ground shakes beneath you. You might lose people, you might be called dramatic, you might feel lonelier than you ever have, but what you gain in return is something you can't put into words. The quiet, undeniable knowing that you finally stood up for you. And maybe that's the beginning of something deeper. A promise to yourself that you'll stop sitting at tables where you're only tolerated. That you'll stop keeping people close who treat your boundaries like suggestions. That you'll stop calling survival strength when what you really crave is safety. Maybe it's not about burning bridges, but about finally realizing that not every bridge was meant to be walked back across. It's a subtle thing, the way fear of disappointment creeps into every decision you make. At first, it seems like a reasonable instinct to protect yourself. You don't want to set yourself up for failure, don't want to fall too hard, don't want to be let down by the world. Or worse, by the people you care about. So you hold back, you make smaller moves, you avoid the risks. You convince yourself that staying in the shadows is safer than reaching for the light. But what you don't realize is that, over time, that self-protection becomes a cage, a prison of your own making. You trap yourself in a life that's smaller than the one you deserve, all because you're afraid of what might happen if you dare to want more, if you dare to trust, if you dare to love and live without the constant weight of what if it doesn't work out. You start making decisions based on fear of what could go wrong. You don't apply for the job you really want because you're scared of being rejected. You don't speak up for the relationship you need because you're afraid of losing it altogether. You don't ask for the help you deserve because you're worried about burdening others. And slowly, quietly, you start to believe that staying in the safe, predictable, comfortable places is somehow less painful than the uncertainty of hoping for something more. But here's the truth that's hard to face. You are not protecting yourself from pain. You are robbing yourself of the possibility of joy, of fulfillment, of connection. And the longer you let this fear rule your choices, the more you shrink, the more you settle, the more you become a passive observer of your own life rather than an active participant in it. And that's when disappointment shifts from being something that might happen to something you've already created. A reality of missed chances, unspoken words, and unfulfilled dreams. It's not that disappointment isn't real or doesn't hurt. Of course it does, but the fear of it is a force stronger than the disappointment itself. It keeps you trapped in a cycle of what-ifs, preventing you from even trying. And in that space, you lose the chance to experience the beautiful messiness of life. The joy, the growth, the wonder that only comes from being willing to take the leap, even if it means falling. Because the truth is, living a life where you're constantly avoiding disappointment is like living with a handbrake on. You may feel like you're moving, but you're never truly free. And maybe you need to give yourself permission to fail. Maybe you need to stop seeing disappointment as the end of the world and start seeing it as part of the process of becoming. Because the most beautiful, authentic parts of yourself are the ones that are willing to take risks. They are the ones that show up vulnerably without guarantee of success and say, I'm here. I'm giving this my all. Even if I fall, I will rise. And when you stop fearing disappointment, something incredible happens. You realize you're already strong enough to handle it. You are already resilient enough to get back up, no matter what. You begin to see that life isn't about avoiding pain, but about embracing the fullness of it. The highs, the lows, the in-betweens. And with that, you give yourself the freedom to truly live, not just as a survivor of your circumstances, but as a creator of your future. You stop holding yourself back, stop living for the what-ifs, and start living for the what could be. And that's when you find out, when you open your heart wide enough to let disappointment in, you also open it wide enough to let everything else in. The success, the love, the adventure, the connection. You finally let yourself live the full, imperfect, glorious life you were meant to experience. And when that happens, disappointment becomes not a prison, but a lesson, one you've learned and outgrown. As you stand here, taking in the weight of what it means to remove these habits from your life, remember this: you are not a person who was meant to be small. You are not a person who should shrink to make others comfortable, to live in the shadow of someone else's expectations, or to stay silent when your soul is speaking its truth. The very fact that you are willing to confront these patterns shows a courage you may not even recognize in yourself yet. We've talked about removing the need to explain yourself, the pressure to always be nice, the destructive cycle of seeking validation, and the quiet betrayal of tolerating disrespect. And when you break it down, it all comes back to one thing: your worth. It's already there in you, in your bones. You don't need to earn it. You don't need to beg for it. You don't need to prove it. It's time to step into that knowing. Living unapologetically means honoring yourself with the same kindness, respect, and love you give to others. It means setting boundaries that allow you to breathe, to heal, and to grow. It means trusting your voice, even when it trembles, and trusting your choices, even when they make others uncomfortable. It means letting go of the belief that you need to be anything other than who you are, fully, completely, authentically you. You've been through enough battles, internally, externally. It's time to stop fighting against yourself, to stop betraying yourself for the sake of fitting in, for being liked, for being good. You are already worthy. You already belong. You don't have to earn respect. You simply have to stop handing it away to people and situations that don't honor your worth. So, take a deep breath, release the pressure, trust that you are enough, that the world doesn't need you to be anything other than exactly who you are. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your life. You don't have to tolerate disrespect to prove your humility. You don't have to live in fear of disappointment. You don't need to seek validation from others because, deep inside, you know who you are. Now is your time to step into the fullness of your existence, not apologizing for it, not shrinking it, not making it smaller for anyone, but living it as you were always meant to, unapologetically. Your life, your boundaries, your choices, your voice. These are the things that deserve to be heard, respected, and honored. So go ahead. Live the life that's waiting for you. You are worthy of it all.